Hi, this is Gail Sokol. On today's show, we're going to be talking about how I got started in baking.
Welcome to Baking Radio. Learn the art and science of baking with author, educator, and award-winning chef, Gail Sokol. Whether you've been baking your whole life or you're brand new to the world of baking and you're looking to build your confidence and learn new skills in the kitchen, you're in the right place. This is Baking Radio.
I am a passionate baker. I am also a chef, a culinary educator, and a cookbook author. And I am so passionate about baking. I love to bake whenever I can. It's almost like therapy for me. And I love to teach people how to bake. And I've been doing that for over 16 years, both kids and adults. And I love to demystify the process because there are various ways to mix ingredients, and a lot of people are so scared of baking. Well, I have to tell you, don't be. I started when I was very little. I probably was about 5 or 6 years old when I dragged the chair to the stove and started making pudding. You know those mixes where you just add milk and the powder from the box, and it thickened beautifully over the stove. And my mom and dad would watch over me, but they let me do it. And that was sort of my introduction to baking. And eventually, I actually moved to the big time and actually put stuff in the oven. And my mom let me do whatever I wanted. She didn't want to be in the kitchen because she couldn't cook or bake. And I do remember, I think I was about 10 years old. She made an apple pie. And the reason this is such a big deal for me is because she never made an apple pie before or since. And it was a memorable apple pie because she put the entire container of McCormick cinnamon in with the apples. So those apples were very cinnamony. So my mom really was not a great role model when it comes to baking or being in the kitchen. But what she did for me, and what I love her for, is she allowed me to explore my passion freely in the kitchen. As long as I didn't burn the house down, I could do whatever I wanted. And I really, really appreciate that, because that's what got me super, super juiced up about baking. And then Julia Child moved onto the scene, and she became this great chef on TV. And there wasn't a lot of role models on television as far as chefs were concerned. Chefs were mostly men back in those days. And there was no Food Network and there was no cooking channel. It was Julia. And Julia and I loved to be together. I even wrote to her. So when I was a young teenager, I wrote to Julia and she wrote me back. And she would send me recipes and she would be very encouraging, even though at that time I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a chef. But I loved hearing from her, and she would type all her letters to me and sign them in her own handwriting, Mrs. Paul Child. So I thought that was very, very cool. I started experimenting with the books that I sort of stole from my mother, and, she wasn't going to use them anyway, and I started making things. And I made a lot of mistakes. I didn't have the right tools. First of all, I didn't have the right equipment. And I just sort of flew by the seat of my pants, and I made cookies and cakes and breads, and they came out just horribly. So if you are someone that wants to get started in baking, I would commend you. I would encourage you. And I would say, do not fear making a mistake. Be fearless, start small, make something that you think that you can handle. A muffin, a cookie. Start something small. Don't go in trying to make some sort of a very fancy schmancy tort, because that might set yourself up for failure. But don't be scared. That's number one. Go in with a good attitude and don't fear the mistakes. Second of all, be brave. After I started making things, I started letting my family taste things. So if they were really, awful, believe me, I have a younger brother, and he would tell me if they were awful, and many times they were. There was one time I think I actually made him sick because he either ate too many of my cookies or something was wrong with them, and he was pretty sick to his stomach at that point. And I think it was from what I made. I still feel guilty about it. But I've really come full circle because I really don't have that bad a disaster anymore. But it's taken many, many years of practice. So what I recommend that you do is bake for family, bake for friends, make muffins, take them to work, give them to your kids, and if they love them, you'll make them again. But don't be afraid to bake. Again, try to do something you can handle. So what I used to do when I got to be a teenager, my grandmother had a favorite recipe that I loved, blueberry muffins. Very simple recipe. And we used to go blueberry picking, and I used to make blueberry muffins with this recipe every single summer. And sometimes with frozen blueberries during the middle of the year when blueberries were not fresh and easy to come by. Well, I decided, you know what? I'm going to enter them in the county fair. And I did, and they won first place. So I got this blue ribbon. I was like, oh my gosh, I actually won I won an award for my baking. This is so cool. And my grandmother was thrilled. And all these other older women that had been entering for years were staring at me, and their eyes were like daggers on me, like, what, you young whippersnapper? And you know what? That made me feel so good that I was so young, and yet I could do something that was not expected of me. And after having so many of those awful failures, I actually had success. So if you keep on working at it, you too will have success. So let me give you a few tips. First of all, read the recipe. If you don't read the recipe, people get carried away. Oh, look, I'm going to make these caramel brownie pecan twists, and they don't know what goes into it. They don't even look at the ingredients, and they set themselves up for failure. So read the recipe. Make sure you understand what it's asking you to do, and make sure you have, first of all, the ingredients. Make sure you have the things that it's asking you to bake with. Use the proper equipment. Now, you don't need the fancy, very expensive equipment, because I rarely buy fancy, expensive equipment. Your hands are your best tools, but you will need something to mix with, and that usually is a whisk and a hand beater or a hand mixer, and they're very inexpensive now. If you really want to go for it, get an electric mixer. Electric mixers are fabulous, and they will probably outlive you. They last so long. So basically, don't fear anything. Get started, and I really want to know what you started with. Let me know. Reach out to me and tell me about your experience. Let me know. On Baking Radio, you can reach out to me, and I would love to hear from you and hear about your stories. I've so enjoyed telling you my story, and next time we're going to be discussing getting organized on your journey to baking, because you do have to get organized before you start. Until next time.